Good morning, everybody. Great to have the opportunity to present today. Thanks for joining my session. Really looking forward to presenting on a whole host of areas related to the 5G ecosystem. So my name is Kester Mann. I'm Director of Consumer and Connectivity at CCS Insight. I may well be familiar to many, but for those of you who don't know me, I've been in telecoms for about 20 years now, including 12 at CCS Insight. And I've also worked for Nokia and Informa Telecoms and Media. And I've tracked operator strategy and network rollout for much of this time and have followed closely the development of 5G services right back from the planning stages several years ago to the first commercial launches in early 2019 to today's widespread deployment and of course tomorrow's next stages in the evolution of the 5G journey. So as I say, my presentation is entitled The Expanding 5G Ecosystem, and I'll cover a host of topics relating to 5G deployment, usage, and its future potential. Just very quickly, as a means of introduction to my company, CCS Insight, I won't dwell on this slide. Just to say we are a research and advisory firm, for those of you who don't know us. We've tracked the telecoms and technology industries now for over 2 decades. We have offices in London, in King's Cross, and also on the west coast of the US. And our research, as you can see on the slide here, spans a whole host of areas in the telecom and technology space, including telecom operators, wearables, virtual and augmented reality, mobile phones, network infrastructure, workplace transformation, developer trends, and much more. And we also have, and I should say this as an introduction to this presentation, we have a very close relationship with the GSA, the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, and supply much of the data for their industry reports, white papers, and presentations, and also their Gambod database, which is the source for some of the data you will see in my presentation today. So in terms of areas that we're going to focus on, I'm going to run through a host of topics related to 5G, including but not limited to some of those you see on the screen here, from 5G rollout, deployment, areas like fixed wireless access, 5G in the enterprise, and private mobile networks. So let's start off with an update on 5G deployments. I think it's clear to me when I look at the data that's coming through on CCS Insights research and also that from the GSA that 5G is now a global technology. And this is a slide here sourced from the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, the GSA, and shows the number of operators investing in and now commercially running 5G mobile networks. Now, just to make the definition clear on this slide, investing, which is the yellow bars here, implies that operators are spending on 5G services, they're developing them, but they haven't yet launched them. Whereas launched, which refers to the green bar, means that commercial services are now generally available to customers over a live 5G network with access to devices and subscriptions. So according to the latest data we have available, and we updated this only a week or so ago for 3Q22, almost 500 operators are investing in 5G, with 44% of those, and that's around 220, having already formally launched their service. But where are these networks? Well, I think this slide shows that 5G is a worldwide technology. So since the first official launches using 3GPP equipment in early 2019, we now have commercial services live in over 75 countries, spread across all continents. And among the most recent places to see live commercial 5G services launched are Tanzania, Oman, and North Macedonia. In many other markets, operators are planning, soft launching, trialing, or at the pre-commercial phase of their 5G journey. And as we can see, only really a few select parts of the world now remain with no provision so far for 5G services, mostly in Africa, a little bit in Central America, and a little bit in Asia as well. So clearly 5G now becoming a global technology. Now let's talk about spectrum, and I think this is a really important slide which shows the development of low, mid, and high band spectrum in Europe. And at CCS Insight, we've always said it's the combination of different bands that will bring the best performance for 5G across a range of scenarios. So low band spectrum, and in Europe, which this slide refers to, this is principally the 700 megahertz band. That's important for wide area coverage. We've heard updates from operators recently around this. Deutsche Telekom, a good example, saying that the reach of 5G at 700 megahertz is between 5 and 10 kilometers outdoors, depending on the terrain. Mid-band spectrum, which is where the majority of launches have taken place, offers a blend of coverage and capacity. And then at the other end, we've got the high band or the millimeter wave, which is where perhaps Europe is a little bit behind. This is particularly suitable to very high speeds and bandwidth. But a few markets are making progress here, notably Italy, one of the first markets in Europe to deploy millimeter wave spectrum, and where we've already seen peak download speeds in excess of 5 gigabits per second. Spain and the UK are markets that are gearing up for the launch of millimeter wave auctions as well. And in fact, only yesterday I heard that the Spanish regulator had published the final bidding conditions for the auction of 26 gigahertz frequencies, with 12 nationwide concessions to be made available. What about the uptake of 5G so far and also in the future? So this is a slide here from CCS Insight. It's from our latest 5G forecast, and it's actually hot off the press. Believe it or not, we shared this with our key customers only yesterday. So it shows that 5G connections we're forecasting to jump from around 620,000 at the start of this year to 1.15 billion at the end of this year, at which time the technology will account for 11% of total mobile connections worldwide. And that's the yellow line on this chart. What's spurring growth? Well, wider availability of 5G devices, particularly in the mid and lower price tiers, and also lower costs of 5G service plans. Now, the numbers will increase further in the future as more networks launch and, of course, expand geographically, and as previously purchased devices connect to 5G networks as they become available. And so by 2026, CCS Insight expects 4.2 billion 5G connections, forming around 30% of all mobile connections. Now, I should say as well on this slide, it's important to be aware of our definition of a 5G connection. I know there's always different understandings of this across the industry. For us, it's one in which a 5G capable device, be that a smartphone, a Wi-Fi device, a dongle, or whatever, is connected to a live commercial 5G network. So 5G device sales or 5G ready tariffs in isolation do not meet the criteria. And we also do not include technologies such as NB-IoT and LTE category M1, which launched initially on 4G networks. So where are people using 5G and which markets are the most penetrated? Well, on a regional basis, and we can see this here from the slide, again, sourced from CCS Insight, in terms of penetration of mobile broadband connections, we see North America at the top at almost 50%. And this follows significant expansion of networks through both low and mid-band spectrum. And actually in its recent results, Verizon, one of the leading operators in the US, recently reported that 53% of postpaid mobile phone customers now have a 5G ready plan. North America is followed by Western Europe at 23%, where leading markets include Finland, Switzerland, and the UK, and then Asia at 17%. 5G connections in emerging markets such as in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East and Africa remain low, but are expected to rise quickly in percentage terms over the next couple of years, as of course more networks launch and lower cost 5G mobile phones become more widely available. But there's one market that really stands out in terms of adoption, and that's mainly because of its size, and that is China. And I said that 5G penetration in Asia was only 17%, but actually China is now representing 55% of the global 5G total number of connections. China certainly was late to the party when it came to 4G, but is now among the leading markets in 5G. Why is that, and what have been the drivers? There's several factors here. Of course, naturally, size, scale, and economic growth gives China an obvious head start. But network deployments are moving far faster than in the early days of 4G, despite a recent slowdown related to COVID restrictions. So we see China absolutely dominating further in 5G, thanks to a couple of main reasons: the political ambition to lead technology development, and also the real drive of local manufacturers Huawei and ZTE, as well, of course, as the greater focus on technology adoption from the increasingly tech-savvy customers in China. Now, inevitably, this very large current share of 5G connections will fall somewhat as adoption in other markets accelerates and picks up pace. But come 2026, the end of our forecast period, we still reckon that China will represent a very significant 42% of the total 5G connections worldwide, and that will be 1.9 billion. Now, I'd like to just dive a little bit deeper into the split of 5G connections by different applications and uses. And so here we have a slide showing the split between mobile broadband, M2M, and fixed wireless access on 5G. So mobile broadband connections, and they're shown here in green, they refer to smartphones, Wi-Fi devices, tablets, and data dongles. And as we can see, they are and will account for the vast majority of 5G connections worldwide. And at the end of this year, that will be still 99%. M2M, machine to machine, and IoT, excluding NB-IoT and LTE-M, as I've already mentioned, will only really start to take off, we believe, from 2024 onwards. That's the orange bar on this chart. So the prime market for 5G IoT in the meantime, at the moment, is China, which is the leading contributor to our estimate of a global total of just under 10 million 5G IoT connections today. We see this jumping, however, to over 400 million by 2026. And then lastly, fixed wireless access, shown here in yellow, will start to grow strongly in the coming years, but still represent a fairly small share of the market compared to mobile broadband. But I'll expand more on fixed wireless access later. Now, I mentioned about the 5G ecosystem overall. I think it's important to look at the device seen as a part of that. And this is a slide sourced from the GSA's Gambot database. And it looks at the device ecosystem for 5G. And there's two key points here to make. Firstly, the extremely high number of supporting 5G devices that are now available, and we've tracked over 1,500 of them. And secondly, and perhaps more surprisingly, certainly to me when I saw this data first, is the number of devices deployed beyond smartphones. So as one might expect, mobile phones make up the majority of the green segment in this pie chart, but there are many other categories as well, notably indoor, industrial, and outdoor CPEs, battery hotspots, notebooks, drones, cameras, robots, TVs, and others that make up a combined 47% share. So a real ecosystem of different devices and different categories now at play. Now, I've shared with you some of the latest status updates on 5G in terms of where we are with deployments and how we see customer growth moving going forward. I think this slide kind of puts 5G into the bigger picture, and I really like it because it shows the huge progress made by the mobile industry in a relatively short period of time and the improvements that every generation of technology launch has enabled. So taking you back to 1G, that was in the 1980s, that was all about basic analog voice calling. Then we had 2G, services that heralded, I'm sure many will remember, the arrival of SMS and email as messaging kind of became a real key application. 3G arriving from the early 2000s, that saw the advent of touchscreens, early apps, and video calling. And 4G, we saw great progress towards a proper mobile internet, encouraging a host of new applications such as Uber and Airbnb. And then 5G was the beginning of exciting consumer use cases in the areas of fixed wireless access, I've already mentioned, virtual reality and gaming, and the start of advanced 5G services in enterprises, smart factories, private networks, and so on. And then the 6G, which is probably only 7 or 8 years away now, realistically, at least in terms of the fledgling and the first network launches. This will support a host of enterprise and other applications, extreme connectivity, the metaverse, of course, augmented reality experiences, and so on. Now, honing back in on 5G, and this slide is probably familiar to many of you, but I think it's worth a quick recap in the context of the rest of the presentation. So 5G brings unique use cases and benefits through a range of features, notably very high capacity, high reliability, and also low latency. And these are typically split into 3 main areas. So we have enhanced mobile broadband with greater capacity at high density locations and speeds above 10 gigabits per second and fixed wireless access, as I've already mentioned. Ultra reliable, low latency communications in areas like private networks, safety and surveillance, and connected vehicles. And then the massive machine type connections. So for example, in areas like smart manufacturing and agriculture, where there may be up to 1 million devices per square kilometre. Now, I'd like to talk about what's next on the horizon on the technology roadmap, and in particular the launch of standalone 5G. So standalone 5G, for anyone on the line who isn't aware, this brings a dedicated cloud native core that importantly is not anchored in 4G. And it's crucial to enabling many of the concepts often associated with the long-term vision of 5G, such as network slicing, private networks, and super low latency application. And I guess to some people, it's the real start of the 5G journey. So this chart here is another one sourced from the GSA. It shows, in green, the number of operators investing in standalone 5G networks. That's now up to 111, compared to those already investing in any 5G network. So that's the orange bar at nearly 500, and that's the figure that I referenced earlier in the presentation. So therefore, just over 20% of 5G operators are now investing in standalone 5G services as well. And a small number of countries already have live standalone 5G networks. T-Mobile in the US is one operator. In Germany, we have Vodafone, Vodafone also in the Netherlands, and Korea Telecom as well. So, excuse me, some of those fledgling standalone networks are now commercially in operation. Now, I want to share with you this slide as an example of what can be done with standalone 5G. And I know there are already some live demonstrations out there around the technology's potential. So these pictures are taken from the Green Planet augmented reality experience held in London earlier this year, which I had the privilege to attend. And visitors attending it were able to use smartphones to travel through 5 digitally enhanced worlds, so rainforest, freshwater, saltwater, desert, and seasonal. Narration by the naturalist Sir David Attenborough helped illustrate through augmented reality, for example, how plants can be aggressive and competitive, and how they can form intriguing relationships with animals. And it for me was a great use case for the new technology, which potentially could be replicated across many other areas and sectors, for example, healthcare, education, and logistics. Now, I've touched on fixed wireless access already. I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into that. A lot of people ask us around consumer 5G use cases, and I think overall it's fair to say we've seen a dearth of exciting new consumer use cases in 5G, at least compared to the advent of 4G 10 years ago, where it really spurred a new way of communicating among consumers. And that's unquestionably been a disappointment for the industry. But I do think that fixed wireless access is one good example, already proving itself to be a useful connectivity option for consumer and business customers, particularly those living in hard-to-reach locations. Now, according to the Gambod database from the GSA, 83 operators are now marketing fixed wireless access services, and that's a figure that's up 88% compared to November last year, so year on year. As we can see on the map, services over either 4G LTE or 5G are available in many markets throughout the world. And impressively, we're seeing some speeds advertised as up to 5 gigabits per second. I think the US is probably a market that should be called out as one of the early pioneers in fixed wireless access, where T-Mobile, one of the biggest advocates of fixed wireless, says it expects to reach between 7 and 8 million fixed wireless access customers by 2025. And in its latest quarter, it said it added 578,000 new fixed wireless access customers, taking its total to over 2 million. So where do we see fixed wireless access going? How does it contribute to the overall forecast? Well, this is a slide from CCS Insight. Again, you can see positive progression on this slide. And the leading growth drivers really are investment by operators, particularly some of the technology champions. And I've already mentioned T-Mobile in the US, but also the likes of Verizon, 3 here in the UK, for example. Wider coverage of 5G as network rollouts continue to improve, and value for money, CPEs, customer premises equipment. So total global 5G fixed wireless access connections, according to our data, set to pass 80 million in 2026, which is over 30 times the 2.7 million at the end of 2021. And once again, China will be a leading contributor, aided, of course, by, as I've already mentioned, its large population and growing widespread 5G investment. Overall, I think my view, and certainly the view of my colleagues at CCS Insight, is that outside perhaps some of the leading markets, fixed wireless access will remain a relatively niche service, complementing existing fixed line networks and offering an alternative solution for certain consumer groups such as students and people living in rented accommodation. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about private mobile networks, one of the hottest topics in the industry right now. In the interest of time, I haven't got time to go into this in detail, but I will certainly share a few thoughts on this. Private mobile networks, as I'm sure many on the line are aware, offer dedicated connectivity solutions to companies, and that could be anything from a single factory floor to a large industrial campus. And the main benefits of this are control over the connectivity, high performance, particularly for mission critical applications, and security. And significantly, private mobile networks are now being deployed across a very broad range of sectors. So the largest, and we can see that here from the chart, is manufacturing, where the GSA, this is another slide from the GSA database, counts 165 customer deployments, with automotive being an important contributor towards that. Education is the second most common group, with 95 customer deployments, and a lot of these are campus networks in the US, but there are also quite a few in Europe as well, particularly in Germany. And then the top 5 is rounded off by power utility, mining, and defence and peacekeeping. So a real wide range of different sectors and areas where private mobile networks have been deployed. Now, what about the adoption of private mobile networks? The number continues to increase impressively. This chart here shows the number of announced private mobile networks that span 4G and 5G. So as we can see, 2019 was probably where things took a real big jump as the total passed 100. This continued into 2020, despite some of the challenges of COVID, where the number of announcements more than doubled. And then according to our data, in the first half of 2022, we saw another 140 customer announcements, suggesting that this year will probably be on a par with 2021 at around about 300. Now, what's driving the traction in private mobile networks? I'd highlight 4 key areas here. So the first is the growing data security and enterprise mobility requirements of modern businesses and government entities. So combining 5G connectivity with big data analytics can really transform operations, increase automation and efficiency, and deliver new services to customers. Second driver is the deployment of advanced 4G and 5G networks. This has brought better support for larger numbers of users and devices, greater capacity, and dramatic improvements to latency for time-critical applications. Third one, private mobile networks are often part of a broader digital transformation program within an organization. And this could include the introduction or deployment of cloud networking, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data and analytics. And then lastly, the replacement of technologies such as Tetra, digital mobile radio, and GSMR. And many of these customers are demanding critical broadband services now simply not available from alternative or legacy technologies. And this means that private mobile networks are becoming a much more viable alternative. Now, an important piece of research shows that private mobile network deployment is gaining fairly global traction, and we can see that from the map on this slide here. So the GSA has categorized nearly 900 different customers deploying private 5G mobile networks located all around the world. So the map here shows the countries and territories with organizations investing in private mobile networks, whether that be pilot projects, deployments, or actual full commercial launches. And indeed, private networks are now deployed in 70 countries globally, including across Asia, North America, and Europe. And the GSA has counted over 50 different equipment vendors that have been involved in the supply of equipment for private mobile networks based either on LTE 4G or 5G. And about 70 different telecom network operators are involved with private mobile network projects as well. And this is the final slide for me today, and it's around the early usage and consumer satisfaction of 5G services. So this is a slide sourced from CCS Insights annual survey of mobile phone usage. It's UK based. It's representative of the population by age, gender, and region. And we asked people who bought a 5G mobile phone last year how their experience compares with their previous device. And I think the findings were pretty encouraging. So we can see some of the responses on this slide here. Most people say they enjoy a better service, it's more reliable and offers faster speeds. And I guess crucially, they do more with their device, whether that's streaming content, playing games, using social media, or making video calls. So nearly 85% said that the 5G experience has met their expectations. Now, for me, two findings really stood out, those being that 85% of people said that their downloads are noticeably faster, and 64% said that they use more mobile data each month. And I think that amid some of the ongoing doubts over the business model of 5G, the return on investment, and the consumer benefits, I do think that this is a positive slide to finish on. But that's it from me. I hope you found that interesting and useful. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event, and look forward to speaking to you again at some point in the future.
Well, Kester, thank you for that. I thought three things were really, if not totally new, a really good reminder. And I thought the first one was about the penetration of 5G deployments, because I think we kind of get ahead of ourselves, and it's good to look at where those numbers are and how low they are. I mean, it's low single digits in a lot of the world, and 23%, I think, across most of Europe. So I think before we keep smacking ourselves about, why is it not all going faster, we need to remember that and how long it takes to roll technology out. And especially a technology that's unlike any other. I thought the other thing that was really interesting, though, was the spread of private networks in more than 70 countries. That surprised me a little bit, actually. And I find that really encouraging. And it suggests we're kind of progressing more in certain areas with 5G than maybe we kind of think. And I think the third thing is, as you said, it's very encouraging that consumers, I mean, that was all in the 80-something% about appreciating the difference 5G makes.
Yeah, 100%, Annie. I think those are really good observations. So yeah, I mean, just picking up on a couple of those. I think the penetration of deployments thing. It's easy perhaps to hear some headline figures, and we haven't heard too many official customer announcements from some of the operators. But I think it's a good point that to realise that some markets are advanced, but actually a lot of those others are still very, very early on their 5G journey, and those are the ones that are kind of bringing down that penetration, and meaning that it's still going to take a long time before we see this fully adopted as a global technology. The spread of private mobile networks, 100%. That really struck me when I saw that as well. Not just the number of countries actually, but the range of sectors as well. All those different areas that are highlighted, and I think that's a real positive for the opportunity. And we know that a lot of people in the industry are hanging their hats on private mobile networks as hopefully that kind of enterprise application that can really start to drive some revenue. And then lastly, your point on the consumer side as well. I wanted to leave on a positive message, but I think that it's clear that there are some challenges around articulating the benefits of 5G to people and encouraging them to upgrade and move to 5G. But actually, once they make that transition, they're really enjoying it and they're finding it beneficial.
Yeah, it looks like they get it. Yeah,
they get it. So I think that so I think that the challenge is perhaps not so much delivering on the technology side, but actually encouraging people to make that migration. And obviously, in a cost of living crisis, that becomes even harder. But certainly,
I still feel with 5G that maybe we're in the swan phase, where there doesn't appear to be much activity above the water, but by God, there's a lot going on underneath. So, Kester, that was really interesting. Thank you very much indeed. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure on my side as well. Thanks for having me, Annie.
Thank you very much indeed.